India has both internal and external concerns. Let us talk about the external concerns first. Some things are so well known, I don't really need to belabor the point. There is Pakistan, there is China, there is the whole issue of Indian Ocean, Afghanistan and what's happening in Afghanistan, Central Asia looming ahead in terms of resources, in terms of access to markets, in terms of access to gas and oil resources, Iran, a resurgent state, possibly a nuclear power emerging in the next few years. So what do we have in South Asia are the following nuclear weapon states: India, Pakistan, China, possibly Iran, and United States in a sort of a remote way, because United States is involved in a variety of ways, including the Indo-US nuclear treaty. That doesn't mean, I'm not suggesting here is that United States is going to back up India in terms of nuclear weapons, but what I mean is that there is a presence, the US has a presence, a military, a political and economic presence that's very strong in this part of the world. So the question is, how does this all hang for India? How does it actually see this evolving? Recently, I think Pranab Mukherjee, I just want to give you some things that I was just looking at, which might interest you, and I'd like to touch upon that. The 2012-13 budget that was presented showed that there was a massive increase in military spending, 17% increase in spending on defense services, raising it to 1.93 trillion rupees, which is $40 billion, which is actually a 41%, which is going to be spent in modernizing, military modernization. India has emerged as one of the largest importer of weapons in the world. Next, well, even surpassing China this year, and it has purchased some 12.7 billion in weaponry between 2007 and 2011 from a variety of foreign countries, and accounts for 10% of all arms sales in the world. So this is a program of military modernization on a very large, massive scale. It is estimated that between 2011 and 2015, India will spend $100 billion on modernization of the military program. That's the estimate. We'll come to the problems a little later, but I just want to give you some interesting figures and what that really means. US, of course, Russia used to be the main source of arms, but now it's shifted to US and to European countries. And it is buying everything: fighter jets, tanks, artillery, small arms, transport planes, submarines, launching platforms, you name it. It's like going into one of these toy stores where you sort of get all kinds of weaponry. But this is happening. It's actually right now, it is a third in number in terms of acquiring weapons from the US. Afghanistan, Taiwan, of course, and second and third is India. Kind of things it has acquired, I'm not going to go into that, but these are sophisticated weaponry which provides, and this is the important thing to know, not only for defense purposes, that is defensive purposes, defending the border, defending the threat, warding them off, a deterrent. That is one way of a reason to acquire weapons, and very good reason to acquire weapons. But weapons are also being acquired in order to project power, which is a very different kind of proposition. It is a very different goal. It is a very different strategic goal. And what India is acquiring is an ability, a capacity to project power. Question is, project power where? So what we see also, concomitant with the acquisition of weapons, is the expansion of what we call the geostrategic sphere that India has now sort of sketched out for itself, which encounters this extended neighborhood extends from the African littoral states all the way to the Straits of Malacca. The main instrument for projecting power is naval power, because army, etc., land powers, and we're not talking about that. But what India is seeking to do then is to really be able to wants to acquire a blue water navy, and to be able to not control, but shall we say, be a presence in terms of the trade routes, the energy trade, the other kind of trade. And China, which must pass through the Strait of Malacca, is of course the competitor. So the China is also extending itself in precisely this area. We call it Indian Ocean, but the Chinese have questioned that and said it should be called Indian Ocean, it should be called something else. And the attempt is therefore to project power within the Indian Ocean. And I must point out to you that in every indice of power, whether military power, economic power, any other trade, other things, China is way ahead of India. So India is catching up all the time. So question is, what does this equation mean? So in terms of defining threats and defining strategic sphere, we have therefore this issue of China and the new resurgent China, which is very powerful economically and is seeking to establish a whole lot of, shall we say, presence. Its presence, which is both economic, building infrastructure in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan. Of course, China and Pakistan have entered into a strategic partnership. So the other thing that India is looking at is a possibility of a Chinese-Pakistani kind of collaborative front, if you like, a sort of collusion. And the fear of this grows as US withdraws from Afghanistan. Now, these are what we call conventional threats and this sort of a long-term scenario. I'm not suggesting here is that China and India are going to go to war, but there is certainly a competition for resources, for energy resources, and for presence and for power and influence in this part of the world. India seeks influence because India has also realized, like everybody else has, that it is very important to protect and extend its economic influence, its markets, its access to all these things, which means that it must also back it up with security, ability to secure these things. And if it can emerge, and this is something that India also is seeking to do, is to play the game, that is, be a player in the game. And the game is now currently being played by the great powers, that is United States, largely, and China as a challenging power, which is seeking to redesign the rules of the game. And what India wants to do is wants to be a player as well, which means that it must also have what Professor Prabhu was talking about is a kind of a global presence. It must have a strategy, ability to have some say in the shaping of institutions, global institutions, whether it is the UN or it is the financial regulation, other kinds of institutions. It is seeking to do that, and it has acquired, as a part of reason, G20, presence in the G20, is being invited to all the forums. And this is happening because there is now the third angle, which is the US. And the relationship between India and United States is both, there are some tensions within that, underlying tensions, but there are also great areas of convergence, as we have seen in the post-Cold War period. So we have therefore a triangular relationship. We talk about the nuclear deal, but more than that, there is a very broad and very comprehensive strategic relationship, partnership between India and United States. United States wants to promote India in a kind of a cautious way, as a counterweight to the expanding influence of China. This is precisely what China fears. And so there is this puzzle, as I was saying, which is an emerging puzzle. Every piece is moving. It is hard to predict which way it will go. So then what would be there for the larger strategic goals India would have? It has always had one goal above all, and that is to retain its strategic autonomy, ability to make decisions independent of outside influence as far as is possible. So acquisition of these weapons and ability to project power and to build up the economy from within are things that it sees as the ways in which it can do. I'd like to just also point out that all these acquisition of weapons would not have been possible but for the fact that India has had experienced faster rate of growth since the mid-1980s, and they have accelerated in the past, until recently. And now again we see there is kind of a setback for a variety of reasons, both internal and external. Question remains in my mind, and I don't know, there are different views on this, whether it's likely to overcome this or whether it's going to see this continuing scenario for some time to come. The other part of the threats that we haven't even talked about, and many strategists who discuss this say that India has more to fear from within than from without. And the within threats are numerous. Not only are they terrorist threats, but they are also the whole Maoist resurgence, which has created a whole swath of territory within India which is out of control of the central state. The central government right now is, as we all know, is sort of losing control of situation in a number of ways. Economy is in a state of decline. Elections have shown results that shows that UPA seems to be on a decline. So we don't know, that piece of puzzle is also moving from within. Whether it can overcome these vectors and to get its house in order and have a focused strategy in order to combat the threats that it perceives as emerging threats from outside. And I haven't even talked about the non-state threats that exist from across the border and from within on its periphery, which is also a very serious issue, ethnic issues, you see, of separatist issues that often get combined with, and joined with the neighboring states where there are non-state actors who link up with them and create impediment and drain the country's ability to take stock of that. So in all these varieties of ways, it's an extremely complex picture. It is a forever on transition. We talk about India as emerging, but it's always arriving. It hasn't arrived. It's forever arriving. We don't know, what the standards would be, but the benchmarks would be that we would see. But I can see this much. If you look at, for example, the last 10 to 15 years, certain conclusions are possible. Those conclusions are, number one, despite enormous challenges that have arisen from within, that is, collapse of the Congress, emergence of the coalition state, coalition regime, great deal of instability and challenges, resurgence of democratic challenges from within the country, great deal of interest groups that have become very powerful and demanding. Okay, all it has managed to reconcile in some ways, cautiously, with setbacks and all that. There have been no coup d'etats, there have been there's no been collapse, there have been setbacks, but it's sort of gotten back on its feet all over again and held elections and, it's managed to have a functioning democracy, and it has built up its economy from within that, and it has also begun to assert its influence abroad. So I think that we are at that stage as far as India is concerned. It is a player in South Asia. It is a huge country, big country with enormous potential. But whether or not it will attain that potential, realize that potential, depends a lot on what happens within India, in as much as it depends on what is likely to happen outside India. Thank you.